War never changes. At the end of the Great War, the Central Powers under multiple military losses surrendered. When the war concluded, there was one weapon that was argued and bickered about, one that caused so much pain: chemical weapons. Most were against them. Most wanted them to be banned in future conflicts, but many in the Allied powers recognized the strength and even the possibility that a weapon so deadly and powerful could prevent major conflicts in the future. So even though it was protested by many, chemical weapons were allowed. To ensure that the world would understand the destruction of such a weapon, lessons and subjects had chemical weapons integrated into school systems, scarring and warning future generations about the cost of war and the power of chemical weapons. The world stayed peaceful for the next 20 years, giving many happiness and joy that the fear of chemical weapons had prevented any major wars or conflicts. And as the world started shifting into democracy and freedom, there was one group in Germany that thought differently: the National Socialist German Workers, or Nazis for short. The Nazis, using the weak and corruptible stability of Germany, started to grow. On November 8, 1923, Hitler and many of his supporters gathered at the Bürgerbräukeller, where they forced the Bavarian government at gunpoint to support him and his cause. But the next day, after the police opened fire on the members, Hitler fled, soon being captured by the government. Facing life imprisonment for attempting to overthrow the government, Hitler tried convincing the judges of his beliefs, but they refused to hear him. On the 1st of April 1924, Hitler was sentenced to life in prison. While away, Hitler wrote books pushing his ideologies, and though he died in prison, Hitler, what seemed single-handedly, pushed extremist ideologies having influence to people even today. For the next 80 years, the world stayed relatively peaceful. Throughout the years, many nations had only stayed neutral, not because of want for peace, but rather the fear of war. This was until 2004, when French fascists, who had gained freedom after the French Civil War in 1998, and who now controlled lands from Rouen all the way to Strasbourg with the help of Belgium, who had a fascist government, declared war on the now socialist France. Germany now allowed to have a proper military, and the UK, realizing the weak state of France, made a shocking and historical decision and declared war on the fascists. While world tensions were high, the Irish and other colony nations that were under control of the UK and French rule rose up. Days later, the Canadians also declared independence from British rule, and because of fears of losing her empire, the British called the United States to put down the uprising, which then the states agreed to. Though the war only lasted a year, the casualties with nearly 100 years of development in chemical weapons were heart-wrenching. And at the end of the war, it was estimated that over 50 million people died, the majority of them being civilians. During the peace conferences, tensions only became higher when the United States and Germany demanded that the UK release some of their colonies, mostly in Africa and the Middle East, under the fact that the UK had promised to be downright harsh and cruel to an extremist level to anyone that dared to define them. Though tensions came to a boiling point when the United States demanded land from Canada because of their help to put down the Canadian uprising. Though Her Majesty protested, she quickly realized that because of her major losses during the war, she could not win a conflict, so bitter and angered, she released her land. The effects of war had left the world battered and shaken. Every continent had experienced war, from the Americas to Asia and even Australia, most of them being uprisings from the British government. Though unlike the end of the First World War, the newest generations, unable to trust most and allowing paranoia and fear to take over, declared isolation, with only the United States, Germany, the weakened French, and some other smaller nations joined a newly formed faction called the NFWP, or the Nations for World Peace. For the next 25 years, the world stayed peaceful, but because of the British territory loss in the uprisings, the angered British started developing plans to cause attacks in major NPFW nations and Old World colonies, with the help of fascists and British sympathizers. The British decided to mix chemicals with the newly British-made disease nicknamed MD100, which causes people infected to go into craze episodes, And on November 20th, 2030, the British released the chemicals in over 50 major cities and capitals in the most planned and organized terrorist attack ever. Then, under the confusion, the British, Mexico, which was under the rule of an war-hungry fascist monarch, declared war on the NFWP, and with a secret weapon developed by the British called a chemical nuke, which was mixed with MD-100, was deployed on major cities and military points. The casualties were in the millions, but unknown to the British, MD-100 spread too quickly to control, and as people began to flee the disease, which would cause someone to go mad, started showing symptoms after a day of the infected point, giving the disease plenty of time to spread around the globe. But at that point, civilization was too far gone to save. The end of the world had begun, and civilization had ended